Another DraftScience video presentation. Yeah. So, I guess we'll just go to examples first and then do some comments in the context of, alright, I've provided some thought experiments, I've provided some evidence consistent with what I'm arguing, and there really hasn't been any counter-argument or counter-evidence presented. I mean, no physical evidence of kinetic energy, the calculated energy being collected in examples where you take two objects that are relatively simply associated. That is, twice as heavy and half as fast. Half as heavy, twice as fast. Inverting mass to velocity ratios makes it clear that the two objects would have to, in Newton's world, they're the same object. In their world, okay, one object has twice as much energy, clearly illustrating the difference between the two theories and the difference in how they see the universe. Alright, now I've given you thought experiments on this, so we'll go over some of those and just point out how we have no resolution, okay? I've asked on Quora, I've asked in these videos, and there's absolutely no acknowledgement that there's a problem here, and there's obviously a conflict between reality and their fantasies. They don't explain it. Okay, so the train thing is kind of easy. All right, so you got, let's make it 510. So you have a 5 mass, okay, going 10 miles an hour, and you combine it with another 5. All right, and now it's going 10. Now it weighs 10. Okay, so we're going to turn it into a 10. Okay, this one's not moving, 0. And now that one's going 5. Now, we all agree on the outcome. Okay, this one combines with this one and we have an outcome. Their theory says that this original one, say, had 250 joules of energy and that this one only has 125. And that somehow half the energy was lost in this process. Now, momentum says this has exactly the same momentum. Okay, the momentum is equal between these two. And whatever, we just give it a number of 150 just to round it off. That's what momentum would say these objects have. So this didn't lose any. Now, of course, in any experiment you're going to have some friction, some noise, some something. So we would say that yes, this is going to be within, say, 95%. Okay, so this value of momentum will be within 95% of this one. It might lose 5% of the energy. Certainly not 50% of the energy. All right. Now their theory, their argument is in this transfer process, in the process of hitting the two, combining the two trains, whether I drop a weight, okay, I have a 5-ton train and I just drop another 5 tons on top of it, and then making a 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour. No matter how I do it, there's going to be some losses to the environment, of course. Tiny losses, though, by comparison. So their argument is that this is always a catastrophic event, that I can't help but lose half the energy. I have to lose it, right? I can't do any better than losing half. So I could lose more than half, but I have to lose half the energy. And they say something like heat and deformation, but there's not going to be any evidence of any of this heat or deformation. I'm not going to see any of it. I'm certainly not going to see half the energy of the thing moving, which has a substantial amount of energy. Has substantial energy loss, not a little minor energy loss. It's half the energy the object possesses. Now, I'm arguing that, of course, the momentum theory says what they're saying is impossible. I cannot possibly deform the object, that is, create energy in some other direction, okay, through heat or deformation, and maintain momentum. That is, I can't transfer the momentum. I can't get 95% of it over here when I burned off half of it in deformation or some other kind of mechanism. So I can't. Any noise I make, any vibrations, anything has to come out of the momentum. So I can't possibly conserve the momentum, as was stated in Physics Girl's video, and then say there was a substantial amount of heat and deformation. You can't keep the momentum. The momentum has to be sacrificed to friction. So if I'm rolling something down the street and there is any friction, I go slower. My velocity has to be compromised by the event. The velocity is essentially being lost to the environment. And so momentum has to drop precipitously with energy. So if my energy drops, that is I created some sort of movement in the environment, it has to come out of my momentum. I can't say I kept the same momentum and yet lost half the energy. That's impossible. It's a physical impossibility. There's no experiment in the history of mankind that demonstrates where I can have a certain momentum, a velocity, and I don't have to sacrifice it to friction. If there's any friction or sounds or other chatter that I can in any way keep my momentum and do that, unless there's a constant force pushing me or some other, not included in this experiment circumstance. But if all I have is my physical momentum, my physical movement, and I don't have an engine, I don't have a constant source, there's no way I can maintain my velocity and cause effects in the environment. Now, if they can prove that, if they can unravel that paradox their theory creates, fine. But they can't. They can't provide me any reasoning that explains how 1/2 the energy went to heat and deformation, except it didn't use up any of the momentum. I lost a tiny percentage of the momentum. No, can't be explained. All right. The other, I guess I'll pause because I have to get the... I haven't, yes, I have to be better organized. All right, should be back. All right, so the other circumstance is the, some understanding of some sort of space travel thing, and you're just going to use releasing objects to navigate, to change the direction of your ship. And we're saying the center of gravity of the ship is consistent with the thing, just so we're not talking about rotating or spinning or any other kind of nonsense. And the idea is you can either eject a heavy weight or you can eject a very light weight. That's which, so you're just changing, you're inverting the velocity to mass ratios. And you're going to release the same momentum in both directions, okay? And yet they're saying that that some other, this kinetic energy thing has something to do with it. So the idea is you're releasing point 0.001 grams here, kilograms, and you're going to release 2 kilograms in this direction. Okay, so we've used a 2-liter Coke bottle for this example and a dime for this example. So you have a dime over here and a 2-liter Coke bottle over here. This will go 1 mile per hour, all right, and this will go 1,000 miles per hour. Okay, but it's thousands of times lighter than this object. It's going thousands of times faster than the object, 1,000 times. Now, momentum says it takes the same energy to make both of these events. Okay, so the same number of joules will be leaving. Okay, this is the same joules in momentum-wise as this is. Okay, this 0.001 times 1,000 is the same as 2 kilograms times 1 mile an hour. So you get the same, I guess we should do 2 here, and then we'll be okay. Okay, so this ratio equals the same energy will be required. The same little explosion will cause both events. Now, Pirro overtly says it takes 2,000, so this would be, say, 2.5 joules of energy. So momentum says with 2.5 joules of energy, or, if we just use plain momentums, one momentum. Okay, so, but obviously you have to, a momentum is a Newton meter, you just make it into joules. I say it's, so conversion would be 2.5. But anyway, let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's just even make it 3 joules. So I can do the whole thing with 3 joules of energy going that way and 3 joules this way. Now, the argument explicitly being made is that if they do this in space, it works. The 2-liter bottle going 1 mile an hour will cause the ship to move exactly the same amount as ejecting the dime at 1,000 miles an hour, and you will continue to go straight. Pirro obviously believes that this is 2,000 joules. To do this requires 2,000 joules of energy, because that's what this has as kinetic energy. And therefore it took 2,000 joules of energy to cause it, not 3. So there's a huge discrepancy here, okay? This isn't semantics. This isn't some two compatible theories. The argument is 3 joules versus 2,000 joules. I mean, it's an insane, okay, wrong, different answer. It's 2 plus 2 equals 4 versus 2 plus 2 equals 4 million. It's just not close. Well, I'm exaggerating, 4,000. It's a huge difference. All right. And, but clearly Pirro doesn't think it took 2,000 joules to do this, because this only has 3 joules of energy. So he's conceding this one only has 3 joules of energy. Yet he's saying this one has 2,000. And so he's saying that the ship would go sideways. I mean, it would just start flying, that way, because this is so much more energy over here, and I must have used a 2,000 joules worth of energy this way, so I'm going to get 2,000 joules worth of thrust in the opposite direction, and I'm going to get 3 from this thing. And he says that makes sense to him. And I'm saying, how does this make any sense to any of you people? How can you possibly understand the world to work this way? And so we're back to the gun analogy. I mean, they think because the gun doesn't move back at the same speed as the bullet, that somehow it doesn't have the same energy. When, yes, it does. The recoil, depending on how much of the explosion you have kept inside the gun and not released, you're going to get quite a recoil. But it's a big heavy mass, and so you spread over a large surface, it's no big deal. All right, so yeah, how do you explain this paradox? Does this make any sense? One answer has to be right. One answer has to be completely wrong. I mean, those are your only choices. So where do you sit on this? Do you understand that the dime and the 2-liter bottle going 1 mile an hour require the same energy, or don't you? I mean, where do you disagree? And if you think it takes 2,000 joules of energy to make the dime move, so you're really saying that they should never shoot small objects because it takes so much energy to shoot them, okay? And so they should only release big objects moving slowly because, wow, it's so much more efficient, only 3 joules of energy, so I'm just saying, it doesn't make any sense. They haven't resolved it. They haven't answered it. They just sit here and keep throwing, oh, you're miscalculating one of the simplest theories you could write, the simplest mathematical formulas in the universe. You're somehow screwing it up, right? Because it's basically saying F equals a quantity, okay, over time. All right, so I mean a change in time. I must have just write the whole thing, right? Delta P over delta T. So you're just saying over a period of time, you're going to get so much of a change in your momentum by any force acting. Now, if in these circumstances, right, all these circumstances we're just talking about, well, what's the final velocity of the bullet and what's the final velocity of the gun? So time is irrelevant, because it doesn't matter. I mean, we could do the final velocity here, we could do the final velocity there, we could do it here, we could do it here, 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 here. It doesn't matter where we do it. And obviously the change in the momentum is going to be a change from the original state. So all you're really saying is the change is P initial versus P final. And you're saying time 0 plus time, well, anywhere is okay. So we'll just forget about it. Time is irrelevant. Okay, and all that is going to be is the force equals your change in your momentum. So you might as well just say if your momentum is being caused by the force, that is the 2-liter bottle was minding its own business and the dime was minding its own business, and all we're really doing is calculating what was the force on these two things. Well, the final velocity will tell you the final momentum, so force will equal momentum. The force is essentially your momentum. Your momentum is made out of forces interacting with you. Every bit of momentum you have can be traced to some force that acted on you, okay, through interaction with some other object that had force, and it transferred the force to you. So it's all momentum is made out of momentum. force equals energy equals momentum. Momentum is the way you detect how much force or energy is involved in anything in the universe, and it holds for electrons, it holds for protons, it holds for atoms, it holds for elephants, it holds for Earth. All right. And so they want to just keep playing with that. That simple formula they want to convert into all of this crap. And, you know, it's just so obviously an evasion of the real paradoxes their formula creates. Again, their argument is that an 8-pound bowling ball going twice as fast, let's assume it goes twice as fast, it is going twice as fast, knocks down twice as many pins as a 16-pound ball going half as fast. Do they have any evidence showing it? Any experiment showing how it has more energy, more capacity to transfer momentum to objects? When an object gets hit, what do you think it is? If I bang into this, I make it go. I hit it, I make it go. What did I do? I gave it momentum. And how can I give it momentum, you know, if I don't have the momentum to give it? What, kinetic energy makes momentum? And it makes more momentum than the kinetic energy, so I can build up kinetic energy, and somehow I can make more momentum out of this kinetic energy number than the momentum that I actually have. I can transfer more momentum than I actually have momentum because I have this special kinetic energy that allow me to give things more momentum than I actually have. Come on. Too silly. Alright, back we are. Alright, so read the comments in this context of they haven't accounted for any of the paradoxes created by their formula. As I told you, yeah, who cares? Fuck you. You have not given any proof of what you say. Now, of course, I have. The proof is in the creation of a paradox you haven't explained. Okay, so until you explain the paradox, that is how I can keep my momentum and lose half my energy and cause all kinds of deformation in the world. That is, I can give things momentum. I can interact, give things lots of momentum, and then still keep my momentum. I can still be going the same speed. That's what you're arguing. It's paradoxical. It's completely inconsistent with reality. And again, in the context, they still haven't explained the first version of this theory was not a derivative of Newton's formula. It was an opposing theory presented by Leibniz. And there was no 1/2 mv squared. It was just mv squared. 100% wrong answer even by today's wrong answer theory. Even their silly make free energy theory, it was even more preposterously making even more crazy free energy. And they don't account for any of the historical truth. They don't show any point in the history where the history all of a sudden became terribly rational. Okay, and it's all based on this stupid work theory they have where they just say force times distance, when we know none of these things have anything to do with a constant force. None of them. None of these interactions have anything to do with a constant force applied to anything. Okay, they're about explosions and they're about transfers that take place in less than a millisecond. So it's just crap. Evasion, evasion, evasion. Alright, you have not given any proof of what you say. Now I have given you proof in the sense I showed you experiments that demonstrate in theory that it doesn't matter what the weight is on one side of a spring. The spring on this side will react the same way each time. So I'm demonstrating essentially that the bullet doesn't care too much about what's on the other side of the bullet. Alright, now theoretically, again, I did explain that if you put absolutely nothing on one side, it will make a difference in the sense that you can move the center of gravity of the spring or of the explosion. But everything has to be qualified to some dynamics. Just like if you go too fast for the spring's compression, you'll just break the spring. Okay. The experiment you are showing does not prove what you are saying is correct. Well, again, whether it proves it or not is not the issue. The issue is it's substantial evidence indicating a probability or a plausibility that you haven't in any way countered with a single shred of evidence. Again, you've had 300 years, millions of physicists, millions of experiments, and yet you can't produce one shred of evidence. Not one piece of hard, real, physical evidence of you collecting this extra kinetic energy. Nothing. Not a single piece of experimental evidence. So you're the one talking shit. Okay, they are two completely different experiments. Well, so again, this isn't a stupid and silly exaggeration, right? To say they're completely different. I'm increasing the mass on one side. Now, merely because I didn't increase it to the Empire State Building, he's arguing that, oh no, there's a dynamic, and some special point the mass becomes significant enough where everything changes. Well, what's the theory for that all of a sudden everything changes thing? Okay, so I showed you where we didn't just double the mass, the block experiment quadrupled the mass, and the same result took place. So even though the mass on one side was 4 times as much, it didn't affect what was happening on the other side. And here you are still arguing that's not evidence. Of course it's evidence. You're unconvinced, but why are you unconvinced? Why? Because you have to defend your religion, not because the evidence isn't substantial. And the fact is you have nothing to counter it with. You have no physical evidence yourself presented to demonstrate what you're saying. That is that the spring only produces 1.4 extra velocity. I have the mass and somehow there's only 1.4 the velocity instead of twice the velocity. So in spite of what Professor Lewin overtly said, that's not how it works. You're the one sitting there telling me I haven't demonstrated any evidence. No, you haven't demonstrated any evidence. Certainly no evidence to contradict what Professor Lewin argued, that this is the way momentum works. So, I mean, just a huge, giant lie. So if you're going to keep premising your arguments with what is a grotesque lie, okay, so just keep lying and I'll just block you. Because I really don't have an obligation to keep doing this over and over and over again. I mean, the experiments have been shown in my videos repeatedly in many cases. And here you are still arguing I have done nothing. Fuck you, you're not allowed to do that. Alright, in the experiment you show in the video, you have 2 bodies that are connected to the same spring, which means that the total elastic energy of the spring goes to both bodies. Duh. Okay. On the other hand, in the experiment I told you, you have 1 spring and only 1 body each time. Again, one of them had the spring release, okay, and the spring stays connected to one object and the other object moves free. The other one is a rubber band. So the 2 were completely different and they show exactly the same tendency. So again, you want to argue the tendency, then you have to argue it from some piece of evidence. And you don't have any counter evidence. So you can't argue that it's not the same thing when it's exactly the same thing in the sense that I've done it both ways. Where the elastic stays connected to both bodies and where the spring doesn't stay connected to both. All right. I told you you have 1 spring and 1 body each time, which means that all the elastic energy of the spring goes to each body. So again, he's saying that somehow it's apportioned based on how much the object actually physically visibly moves, which of course we know it doesn't need to be visible. We know that I can make an object not only heavy, but I can create a huge amount of friction so it doesn't move. Now, does that mean that the energy didn't go to the friction? Does that mean that the heat that they created and the friction and the binding forces didn't use up the energy? Well, of course they did, so they couldn't be transferred to the other side. So you could just argue that the Empire State Building gets the same energy, but what does it do with it? It wastes it on friction. It wastes it on movement you can't see, but it's still movement nonetheless. All right. I don't know. Just you have one spring, whatever. So I mean, obviously, it's as substantial evidence. You're dismissing it based on this irrelevancy, and you're providing zero physical evidence defending your theory. You're just saying I believe it. You're not giving me one single piece of evidence to showing your side is correct, showing me why I should believe you are right. And why I should understand Professor Lewin is stupid on this case. I mean, he is stupid, but I'm just saying that somehow he doesn't know what momentum is. So obviously it's not the same experiment. So again, if you're going to keep using this obviously gratuitously excessive language to describe everything, then fuck you. I'm just not going to waste my time with somebody who can't be at all honest. Okay, so obviously it does not prove what you are saying is correct, so the experiment is not proof of what you said. So you just keep saying this horse shit, and yet you don't explain why nobody has critiqued Professor Lewin's video. If Professor Lewin is saying something wrong, why don't you correct him? Why have none of you corrected him? Not one of you has the balls to correct him. All right, so I'm going to say to you, you can't talk this rude shit to me, okay, until I see you talk it to Professor Lewin. So until you harass him with this over the top nonsense rhetoric, tell Professor Lewin your experiment proves nothing. Go ahead, tell him that shit. Let me see you type the comment. Prove to me with a screenshot that you typed that fucking comment on his fucking video, and then come back here and talk this shit to me. All right. So I repeat. That's all you repeat. That's all you do is repeat the same shit and explain absolutely nothing. Count for nothing I have said. You respond to none of the paradoxes I provide you. You reply to none of the points I make. Okay. That you have not brought any proof of what you say is true. So again, a big fat fucking lie. All right, no one, and you're the one who hasn't provided any evidence, any experimental evidence. Okay, no, I do not disagree with Walter Lewin. Well, I'm just saying you can't possibly agree with him and then say the experiment doesn't show anything. He clearly pointed out this is basically a law of momentum. You can't break it. He said this is the way nature works. These are his words, okay? You can't get around. You can fudge kinetic energy, but you can't get around the laws of momentum. Those are his words. So don't tell me you don't disagree with him. You're a fucking liar. You say momentum can be different. You can create different disproportional momentums on the different side of the spring. You're the one asserting that. Professor Lewin is overtly saying it doesn't work that way. So, I mean, this is just bullshit. I really should, I'm not, this is your last comment if you can't up your game a little bit. If you can't do a little better than these constant sentence for sentence, every fucking one of them is a lie, then you're not going to post here anymore. Okay, there is no momentum in any of his lectures. So, what a lie. There is no moment, okay, in any of his lectures saying that if I connect a single body to a compressed spring and release the spring, the momentum of the body will always be the same regardless of the mass. Yeah, it will, outside of the fact that you have zero mass on one side of the spring. But yes, anything you put on there that's heavier than the spring itself will not allow the spring center of gravity to move. So it's like dropping a slinky. I mean, they've already proven this. The bottom of the slinky, I hold the slinky, I drop the slinky. The bottom of the slinky doesn't move. It just sits there. Because from its perspective, nothing's changed. Gravity's pushing it down. Gravity's pushing the other thing down. Nothing's changed from its perspective. It's still under the same pressure. All right, and that's sort of just the way it works. And anything that would happen on one side of the spring has to be a reflection, essentially. So it has to be way behind what's happening on the other side of the spring. So this side of the spring is already expanded before this side knows, hey, guess what? I can just fly out that way. It doesn't know it till the other side is already gone. So he does say it. So I'm just going to say he writes it as a law. This inverse relationship always exists. Momentum always does this thing. So again, you could say he doesn't say it. He does say it. His equation is right there on the blackboard. This is the relationship. You can't break the relationship. There's so much momentum on one side. There's so much momentum on the other side, and that's it. He does say it. It is in his math. All right. That if I connect a single body, compress the spring, blah, 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 blah. I have not seen any of his lectures he claimed such a thing. Well, it's right there written on the board as a law. So I'm not replaying the video just for you. Go watch the entire video, okay? Watch the entire mathematical description where he basically says it's got to be 2 times, okay? Half the mass, twice the velocity, because you can't destroy the momentum. So I do not disagree with the professor. I disagree with you. So that's just horse shit. I've given you my terms. So fuck this bullshit. Okay, I mean, fuck your lies. And that's just a lie to say Professor Lewin wouldn't overtly say to you, of course I meant what I said when I said it. When I said you can't fuck with momentum, I meant what I said. Okay, I did not say that he was wrong in the experiment that shows we have conservation of momentum. Well, again, how can you have conservation of momentum by your own definition? Okay, if you're going to say the whatever the compression of the spring is, it can be variable. It can't be variable. A certain compression of the spring means a certain joules of energy have been stored. Those joules must be distributed, and they have to be distributed equally in both directions. That's the rule, fuckhead. That's the rule he wrote on the blackboard. Okay, in the experiment, I am telling you we do not have conservation of momentum. Well, again, so you're overtly disagreeing with Professor Lewin. I'm just saying quit lying and saying, oh yeah, I agree with Professor Lewin because he doesn't think there's conservation of momentum. When he overtly said it, there's always conservation of momentum. It's conservation of energy, you know, in terms of kinetic energy that we can fudge. The momentum at the beginning is 0. So again, this lie I'm not going to accept either. All right, you retards want to say that because 2 things are moving in opposite directions, there's no momentum. Of course there's momentum. So it's just silly to say the momentum is 0. The momentum is in the stored spring. The potential energy exists in the stored spring. Okay, and then when you release the objects, there's not 0 momentum because it's going in 2 different directions. There's momentum going in 2 different directions. There's energy moving in 2 different directions. It's just so fucking stupid. I mean, this is part of you that gives your physics absolutely 0 credibility, is for you to say, oh, there's no momentum. I started with no momentum and there's no momentum. Yes, everything's moving all over the fucking place, but there's no momentum. I mean, it's just too fucking stupid. All right. At the beginning it's 0, and at the end of the experiment it's no longer 0. Yeah, well, whatever. So we do not have conservation of momentum. So again, what a pile of shit. Okay, so I do not disagree with Walter Lewin. I disagree with, so just more horseshit. Again, Walter Lewin clearly stated there's conservation of momentum. It's a law. So you're just a liar. Okay, you were the one to take the different experiment, claim something that is a lie. So again, I didn't claim anything. I said it's pretty good evidence, frankly. Okay, I mean, doubling the mass didn't change anything. And then the other experiment, we quadrupled the mass and it didn't change anything. So that's pretty convincing evidence that if I double it again or I triple it, or, you know, again, when do you say all of a sudden it becomes important? With the 4 wooden blocks, obviously the friction was getting so high that the blocks weren't moving much at all. So, you know, we're already, isn't that enough of a statement right there that clearly the friction is now eating up one side of the momentum's energy? So I'm already almost to the point of an Empire State Building in the fact that, you know, how many more blocks, wooden blocks, would I have to add before I have 0 motion on one side? And yet it's going to be the same momentum on the other side. I can't steal the energy from the other side and make it go this way. You can't steal the energy of the explosion going this way and make it go that way in the amount of time it requires for you to actually push something that already left from the explosion. Okay, I disagree with you. with you where you take the different experiment and claim something, it's a lie. Obviously, I have evidence. Well, where is it? I mean, this is a lie too. So if you're going to keep saying that your formulations are evidence, fuck you, we're done. Okay? I want to see experimental evidence. All right? If I have to produce it, you have to produce it. So this is just absolute horseshit to pretend that you have fucking evidence in the form of some fucking idiotic derivation that I've already pointed out why it's absolute horseshit. Okay, it is Newton's second law. So again, it's a lie to call it Newton's second law. Newton didn't believe in it. Newton didn't use it. Newton knew nothing. I thought it had no credibility. So quit calling it Newton's law. It's not Newton's law. It's your fucking perversion. It's words you put in Newton's mouth, you disgusting liar. Even that should be reason for me to block people from now on. How dare you? How dare you? I mean, the very formula invented by Newton's worst fucking enemy, and you're saying it's Newton's law. No, it isn't Newton's law, shithead. It's your fucking goddamn idiotic theory, not Newton's theory. All right. And the principle of conservation of energy. Now, we're talking about the conservation of momentum, and that's what fucking Newton would have said. Yes, momentum is conserved. You're just such a liar. If you do not know what they are saying, it's your problem. No, you're the one who's lying about the history. You're the one pretending that somehow Newton did this derivation when he didn't. You're somehow thinking that Newton got right answers because he used kinetic energy. No, he didn't. He got right answers because he didn't use it. The fact that you are lying, so again, I'm just going to block you there. I'm not going to take this shit from you anymore. You're an unaccountable nobody. So put a face to your goddamn channel or I'm done listening to you lie. Okay? Fuck you. Alright? The evidence is clear. I've presented it. You can't say I haven't presented any evidence. That's a fucking lie. You can't say I distorted Professor Lewin's words. I played his fucking goddamn words. You're a liar. And I'm not going to accept it. Okay. That you are lying about the results of the experiment. Okay, so I'm not even going to read the rest of it, okay? I'm just removing it. If you can't up your standards, you're not posting here anymore. Got it? Retard? Let me just read Richie's, the other guy's reply. Oh, why does it do that? So annoying. Alright, if Newton's law agrees 100% with the formula for kinetic energy, obviously it doesn't. Obviously, Newton wouldn't have gotten the right answers if he used kinetic energy. So again, this is just a ludicrous argument for anybody to think when Newton was doing his calculations, he somehow snuck mv squared in there. Because he didn't. He thought of everything as just being mass with velocities. That's how he thought about everything in the universe. He just said, how big is it and how fast is it moving? That's how he calculated every motion in the universe. So again, anyone saying otherwise is just a fucking liar. They'll never find anything in any Newton calculation that has any similarity to 1/2 mv squared, and certainly no similarity to mv squared, which was the competing theory at the time. And again, let's understand, Leibniz died a nobody. Okay? Nobody was convinced by Leibniz's unevidenced arguments. And then this was dug up 30 years later by these French, prima donnas, based on clay experiments, for fuck's sake. So they were nothing more than carnival, just like Ken Wheeler and his fucking Pharaoh cell liars. Will you deal with that argument? How are you not doing the same thing Ken Wheeler does? I will show you one kind of thing, and I'll make it look like, oh, look, light is bent by magnetism. Do you think light is bent by magnetism, fuckface? Well, kinetic energy is just as big a sham, okay, based on a misinterpretation of an experiment, period. Okay. All right, if Newton's law 100% formula kinetic energy, would you not back up Draft's claim that kinetic energy formula is redundant? It's not redundant. It's a competing wrong answer. Come on. And his unneeded contrivance. It's a completely useless and dangerous contrivance because it does get wrong answers. It can do nothing but get wrong answers. Oh, look at all this crap. Oh. All right. The answer to this is no. We have two main reasons for this. The first reason is that there are cases where it is easier. So again, this isn't about some kind of easy. Newton's math doesn't get the same answer, so quit lying. Okay, if I'm navigating a spaceship based on Newton's laws, okay, I understand that the 2 kilograms going 1 mile an hour is the same amount of thrust as the dime going 1,000 miles an hour. Newton says those are the same events. Okay, I'm going to maintain my direction because I did the same thing this way as I did that way, and now I'm back to where I am. Okay, and your mechanics says entirely different. So deal with that facts. Okay, Newton and you get different answers to the questions. All right. Cases where it is easier to use the conservation of energy instead of solving the differential equation. So just more nonsense about any need to solve an equation. You don't need to solve any fucking equation. The goddamn soda bottle's going 1 mile an hour. The goddamn dime's going 1,000 miles an hour. What equation do I need to solve? Oh, that's right. I don't need to solve a fucking equation. The simple point is how much energy did it take to do those two things? You say 2,000. You say 1,000 times more energy went one way than the other way. And it's a preposterously silly theory for which you have zero physical evidence. Of course, the answer will be exactly the same. So just this is more lies. There's no same answers here. 2,000 joules is not 3 joules. 2 versus 2,000. Are those the same number? No, they're not the same number. Okay, for example, in an elastic collision, two bodies, we don't solve the differential equation from Newton's laws. We just use conservation of energy. It's just a joke. Well, we use the work function, the big, fat, phony work function. Force times distance, whatever that is. And conservation of momentum, and we have two algebraic equations with two unknowns. So just more horseshit about how this is about an equation. It's not about an equation, asshole. It's about understanding kinematics. It's about understanding why do things move and how do they become moving objects. And the fact is, if something's going to be given momentum, it has to get the momentum from something. Something has to give it the momentum. You don't get momentum for free. You don't get to hit the thing and then hit it again and hit it again with the same energy. You don't get to do that. Shit. And conservation of momentum, we have two algebraic equations and unknowns. The second reason, of course, is that we don't have only kinetic energy as a form of energy. We have things like work, heat. Yeah, all of these things they call chemical, all these things are exactly what I state. They're just another form of momentum. And you cannot make momentum for free. Is that too simple a statement? You cannot make momentum for free. You can't change something's momentum for free. You have to apply momentum in some form. All right, so this is all just bibble babble. Not only kinetic energy or potential. So again, this isn't about potential energy. This isn't about chemical energy. Just more lies, lies, lies. For example, thermodynamically, we have 4 unknowns and 3 displacements. Okay, there's just no point in reading this, right? He's never going to get to the subject. All right, but conservation of momentum will give you the relationship between the velocities, but it won't give you what will be the velocity. So they're just more nonsense. Of course, all of these things give you velocities. Because let's say the relationship we will get the conservation of momentum will be, okay, so he says V1 over V2 equals 2. Yeah, that's the thing written on Professor Lewin's blackboard. The part where he pointed out, yeah, if you go half the mass, you get twice the velocity. You go twice the velocity, you got half the mass. But this equation have an infinite number of solutions. So what? The solutions are all consistent with that 2 number. Okay. Whatever number you will put in V1, you will get an answer for V2. So what will be the right answer? So again, there's no one's arguing it's one velocity and only. You can only do 10 and 5. No, you can do 8 and 4. Or you could do 2,001. You could do 1,001. Okay, and then you'll get a really silly disproportion. All right, so how will you find the right answer? You need one more. You don't need any more equations, just more horseshit. I've already shown how 1 Newton is just the weight of a stick of butter, and a joule is just that same weight after it fell 1 meter. How much does it weigh after it fell 1 meter? Falling 1 meter weighs how much more? That's the simple answer. So this is all just bullshit. All right, just evasion after evasion after evasion. Okay, so I'm deleting this. And again, if you call me a liar again, we're done. I'm just letting you know. Unless you have some kind of real quotes where you're quoting where I'm lying. But other than that, I'm not accepting it anymore. Fuck you. Until you have the balls to go tell Professor Lewin he's wrong. Till you have the balls to tell him what you wrote on the blackboard doesn't hold, right? Say that even. If the spring is tied to the Empire State Building, what you said doesn't hold, right? That somehow the cart is now going to go some fantastic amount of speed in the opposite direction because now the spring isn't attached to something heavier. It isn't attached to something lighter. All right. So enough of that. Disgusting. It's just so irritating. Like I said, they just keep evading the simple paradoxes. So this JPG guy, right? Are you satisfied that they've answered any of these paradoxes? Are you satisfied that they produced one piece of credible evidence somewhere in this whole mess? One reason for me to believe? One reason for me to be convinced? Have they addressed the history at all? Why this formula exists in the first place? Have they addressed it at all? Explained it all while it's really credible? The fact that Leibniz didn't like Newton's theory for religious reasons is a perfectly good and rational reason for him to protest and create this fake notion of spectacular amounts of energy being created by velocity. Anyway, I'll take a pause. These people are just such scum. Alright, should be back. So we'll do a little Jerry Hall. I just want to emphasize the point. Their theory is that this extra kinetic energy stuff, I can make something go faster and create many more joules of energy by making something go faster. And that somehow this extra kinetic energy will actually move more things in the universe. That is, if I take the bullet going 1,000 miles an hour, the dime, the 0.00 kilograms, okay, the tiny thing, the thing that's thousands of times smaller in mass than the soda bottle, that I will be able to move thousands of times more atoms with that dime than I can this giant soda bottle with millions of atoms in it. That they think there's truly is thousands of times potential to move pins, to knock little pieces of the universe around with that tiny little dime than there is with that giant soda bottle. Yes, it's going much slower, but it literally has billions of more atoms to do the moving with. Billions of more little fingers pushing kind of thing. It's just so silly. Anyway. Alright, so Jerry again, starting all this equation crapola. I've already been over it. The simplest equation in the world. They just keep doing this shit. Not the simplest, but it's pretty fucking simple. And so what does he change? Okay, F equals mass times change in velocity. So I don't know why he's rewriting Newton again. Okay, it's change in momentum. Okay, but whatever. Is not equal to F equals change in momentum over 1. Okay, so he's saying time, I can't just say, let's just say the unit of time is going to be the unit of the force's impact. So I have a force, I'll just make time the unit and just say it's the amount of time it took for the impact. How could it make a difference? You're saying that somehow the final momentum is made out of this stuff you're saying that's somehow in there. There's nothing in there. You can't apply the formula at all. All right, number one, you're not supposed to be applying it at all when it comes to interactions. You're supposed to be applying it to circumstances where there's being a constant force applied. Now, until you can prove that there's a constant force applied when a steel ball hits a steel ball and transfers its energy, have you proven somewhere there's some constant force applied for that to happen? No, you haven't. All right, is not equal. Okay, sure. Delta t can have this value like many other values, but one has to separate the formula itself from the number you put into it. Well, let's say the formula was intended to describe a circumstance in which there's a constant force. That is, every period of time there's a force being added, right? So every period of time there's a force, there's a force, there's a force. Then obviously you're collecting the same momentum here. You're collecting momentum here. You're collecting the same momentum here. Right? And so then that's why time is relevant, because you're really trying to find the amount of force over a period of time, and it's in increments that are time dependent. So it makes sense to divide, well, there's 3 time units, and then the total amount of stuff that happened, I'll just make this line, this is a 2 and a 2 and a 2, and then I'll say 6 divided by 3, and then I'll get my 3 as an answer that each unit was 3, or 2. Yeah, 2. 3. Okay, 2. And so that's where that becomes useful. But let's say that it's not time dependent. I'm not in it. This isn't about a constant force. It's about a change in the momentum. So we just get rid of the time. We don't need the time. So we just take it out of the equation. We just say force equals delta P. Why wouldn't that be the correct answer in a circumstance where there's no constant force? We're just looking for the change in the momentum is what the force will create. Because the force is momentum. Again, it's just so obvious. The force is obviously momentum. So if I'm applying the force because I have a momentum, I'm going to move into something. I have a momentum of 5. I'm going to hit something. It leaves with a momentum of 2. Now, is it or is it not a fact that, well, I obviously only have a momentum of 3 now because I just gave 2 momentums to this? Didn't that just happen? And isn't that exactly the explanation? I had a force inside of me. I applied my force, okay? There was a force involved in the transfer. What went over here? 2 momentums, okay? The change in the momentum is 2. It was standing still. Now it's going 2 momentums. And what did I pay for it? I lost 2, okay? So now I'm at 3 because I lost 2. I lost 2. Now I have 3 momentums. Well, why can't you understand that? What's fooling you here in this analogy that you have to have momentum to give momentum? And clearly the force is always going to be momentum. You can't make it into something else. You can't give away anything other than momentum. That's all you can make. And you're just saying that I can create more of this fake kinetic energy that enables me to create exaggerated amounts of momentum. So I can do this. I can give this one 2, and I can give this one 2, and I give this one 2, and I give this one over here 2. I can give away 8 worth of momentum because I have this special kinetic energy thing. I mean, bullshit. All right. A formula is a description of how to calculate something. Well, if that's what you think it is, then you're pretty silly. Formulas are supposed to be simplifications of the relationship that exists. The relationship I just pointed out. Okay, that you have to have something goes in, something comes out, and you're just creating a simple way of doing the geometry. Okay, a simplification of the simple dynamic of where the pluses and the minuses are. Okay, so it's just a formalization of a model. That's it. A way to formalize, get to the essence of the moving parts. In this case, the letter T means a variable. Oh, duh. If I put in the constant, well, again, I'm just saying the variable you have to recognize is because the force would be a constant force. So again, you're saying that all interactions are application of a constant force for what? A period of time. And you're saying that the constant force has little intervals in it. Well, so what? Let's say if it did. So what? We know it's not a constant force. We know it stops. When the spring expands, it's all done. So how do you explain that? We're not trying to figure out the incremental amount it was accelerated every second. We're trying to figure out what's the total change in its momentum. But anyway, that would fool us to believe time can have any other values. That would fool us to believe, I don't know, saying F equals mv. Okay, and what I'm just basically saying, the change in your momentum. Yes, if you have no momentum, then the force is essentially going to be your momentum. That's going to be the change. The force will equal the change in your momentum. Because you have set the time to 1 is a logical fallacy. So he's saying, I say it's a logical fallacy for you to keep claiming that everything is like gravity. That like a car crashes into another car, and that's a gravity equation. Now, it is a weight equation, okay, but clearly the weight isn't consistent. It's like me dropping the butter. Okay, when the butter's sitting on the scale, there's a constant force. When I drop it, it's not about the constant force anymore. It's about the accrued velocity that's taken place while the butter drops. So it has an impulse force. It has the ability to provide a force, but the force has a definite amount to it. There's only this much force in the butter. It can't have more than that, and that's defined by its velocity. And there's nothing to keep adding velocity. You're just so full of shit. Okay, the fallacy is that it doesn't have to be 1. Well, again, I'm arguing that if you were going to take a formula for a constant force and turn it into a formula for a impulse, that the easiest way to do it is just to put a 1, just to get rid of the time factor, because it's not necessary. Okay, the case where F not equal to mv are just as important. Well, I'm just saying you're showing no cases. You're showing absolutely zero evidence of your theory. Okay, nor are you showing anything to demonstrate that there's any constant force or any of that horse shit. All right, well, this guy I think I'm about done with. I've only read. I haven't even hit the more button because this is such a stupid and retarded argument. Again, why should I have to keep responding to preposterous mischaracterizations of what I've said? I mean, these are just insane, silly lies. So he says again, you represent velocity squared semantically this way. Well, who cares? I don't care. If I put a little, the other symbol that goes up, I've seen it use that one too. There's a little keyboard symbol that has a little arrow goes up. I've seen it done that way too, fuckface. Fuckhead. Get an education. Go fuck yourself till you're, appropriately dead. And you'll already smell, no doubt, so it probably won't make you much smellier, but, whatever. F equals mv has velocity as defined by dt. So, change in time. So the velocity is about the change in time. It's not about the actual momentum the thing can possibly give it. Okay, being a time component. DraftScience states, start quote. So this is a big deal here. 4.9 meters of actual distance per second. Yeah, and I said that exactly in what context. So again, this is more just insane quote mining. And obviously no reasonable person watching the video could possibly misconstrue what I said into anything other than, because I clearly stated, but it has a velocity of 9.8 meters. So the simple, So I'm doing this, this is, I guess I've already done this in a video where I drew part of this already. The trick with gravity is you go your first amount of time, okay, 1 second. So you're falling, and everything falls at the same rate. Let's understand. If I want to double the velocity for an object, this object, I want to double its velocity, I have to go 4 times higher. If it weighs half as much, I have to go 4 times higher. If it weighs 1/10, I have to go 4 times higher. If it's one fucking atom, I still have to go 4 times higher to double its velocity. Okay, it's a rule that everything has to obey because everything falls at the same rate because gravity is disproportionately applying the force. The more mass you have, the more force it gives you, the more it pushes because it's bigger. So everything goes the same speed. I mean, this is just such a pile of shit. Well, anyway, so in the first second, all right, so this is the 1 second mark. You're done 1 second. Okay, all you've traveled is 4.9 meters. That's all you did. Okay, that's the fact. 4.9 meters. That's all you did in 1 second. But you're traveling a velocity of 9.8 now. Okay, so now your velocity has increased. So after traveling 4.9, you're going 9.8. So in the next second, what's going to happen? Well, you're going 9.8, so you're going to get this, double that, right? Plus, now gravity, because you're in your second, now gravity, see, gravity adds. Now gravity is going to add again. It's still only going to give you 4.9, but it's going to give you another 9.8. So now after the second, okay, you have 9.8 plus 9.8. So now your velocity, well, let's just make this 10 just to make it easier. Okay, so in the second, now you're going 20. So after 2 seconds, your velocity is 20, okay, plus, yeah, no, it's just 20 because you haven't added anything else. Okay, now you're going into the third second. So I drew this in the wrong place. The third second is this. The second is here. Okay, after 2 seconds. Okay, so you've got, this is the initial gravity. This is what gravity gave you. So gravity gives you some distance. Okay, but your velocity gives you this much. Okay, so, yeah, I drew that right. This is 9.8 meters, right. So now I'm going 20. So that's going to be twice this line. Okay, so now in the third second, I get that plus this, and now gravity adds the 5 again. All right, so that's how it works. Okay, you can't barely see the 5 there. Okay, so it's always, this is just 5. This is what gravity's adding each time, 5, 5, and 5. But your velocity is accruing. So now you've added another 9.8, another 10. So now you're going 30 miles an hour. Okay, is your velocity. Okay, so the rate at which your velocity is increasing, okay, is because you're adding it up. Your velocity is increasing. So the amount of distance you travel in the 5th second is going to be a combination of the velocity given by each one of those previous seconds. And so your velocity is increasing based on this line. This line is doing a lot more than the added line. So as you're further and further along in falling in gravity, the added component is fairly insignificant compared to your residual component. The part that you've already acquired is getting huge, okay, and the part being added is becoming minuscule by comparison. But I never gave any indication that I thought, oh yeah, you only go 4.9 meters, and then you have to wait in the second, you go 4.9 meters, and then you go 4.9 meters. I never said anything to indicate that, so that's just such a fucking lie. So, this comment is done on its face. All right, F equals mv has velocity defined. Okay, that, yeah, that's the one. Defined by dt component. Okay, wait here. It says, all right, so yeah, it says right here. Okay. Start quote, 4.9 meters of actual distance per second. Of actual distance added by gravity. Shit. End of quote. So again, quote mine, not the whole context. Then he says, divide by 300 meters by 4.9 meters per second, get DraftScience result of 77.5 seconds. So he's saying that I'm saying that it would take 77 seconds for a penny to fall from the Empire State Building. So he just ignored the fact that I've always said, whenever I said 4.9, somewhere in the sentence right before it or somewhere in the sentence right after I said 9.8. That's a fact this liar has excluded, okay? So it's just horse shit. I'm not reading it. We're done communicating. I'm not going to keep answering your lies. Now this comment is, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, uses kinetic energy predictions pertaining to the atmospheric conditions. Well, we know how poorly they predict some weather, so that's not saying much. And again, how would this make any difference? Garbage in, garbage out. If you already have a wrong assumption about the engine that's creating energy, then it really doesn't matter what you're doing with the energy if you're going to put it back into the same system. So I'm just saying, if I've calculated how much explosive power an ounce of gasoline has based on my kinetic energy theory, that is how fast it made a particular thing move, I've already exaggerated it. But it all depends on what I use for a test instrument, right? So if I test it using big things, the gas has more energy than if I test it using little things, or vice versa. NOAA also uses kinetic energy to measure the energy released in a hurricane. Okay, so this is how off subject this is, right? We have this simple train paradox that I illustrated in the beginning. The simple, look, let's just give me your argument, okay? Do you understand that if I was a NASA engineer and I was deciding to throw things off the rocket to create thrust, okay, your argument is that if I throw a dime at 1,000 miles an hour, it'll require 2,000 joules of energy. But if I throw a 2-kilogram bottle 1 mile an hour, it'll only require 3. Will I or will I not get the same thrust from those two objects? What do you think the NASA engineer would say? What would the NASA engineer say? Would the NASA engineer say, if I throw the dime, I get 2,000 joules of thrust? Or is he going to say, no, that's horseshit, I'm only going to get 3? That's a simple question. Answer that question. Show evidence relevant to these questions. This horseshit of going so far afield to say that there's some evidence of the kinetic energy formula in hurricane science is so ludicrous. I mean, it's just preposterous. You're going to show me a proof measuring the energy in hurricanes? You can't even show me, a spring shooting an object and then collecting it again. And yet you're going to sit there and tell me you have hurricane evidence? You have calculated exactly how many molecules moved when the hurricane moved into Florida or something. You calculate how many joules of trees fell down. I mean, what a preposterous pile of horse shit. All right. So we already read that piece of shit. So let's get to the Piro thing. I'm going to get out of here. I mean, I wanted to get to this earlier. Yeah, well, maybe I'll take a pause since I can. Yes, I will. Yeah. Alright, I'm back. Alright, so JPG guy says, Piro, he's not asking for much. I don't even know if he's going to paraphrase what I'm asking. I'm asking for a shred of logic or evidence. And neither one has been produced. Give us a single paragraph explaining how kinetic energy is real. No, show us an experiment where it's actually collected. Okay, and include and show us where Newton was getting wrong answers. Show us all the wrong solutions Newton would have gotten. Show us how badly Newton would have landed the lunar module on the moon. Like how badly it would have crashed using Newton's physics. Okay, without 1/2 mv squared, clearly your thrusters are going to be on much less, depending on what you're throwing out of your thruster. So clearly there's going to be a different result. If I use mv squared, I'll calculate different amounts of thrust being produced by the spacecraft than if I use Newton's physics. So why don't you just show me how Newton would fail? Now, if I use Newton's mechanics, it doesn't work and it crashes. Show me something like that. All right, anyway. Kinetic energy is regular energy. So this is just more, blah, 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 blah. Oh, here, I didn't finish this. How kinetic energy is real. Include everyday examples showing us the reality of collecting kinetic energy and an easy explanation of how collected kinetic energy is somehow completely different. Well, there's no point in saying an explanation of how collected kinetic energy because they never collect it. and distinguishable from collected regular energy. We should just said momentum. So again, this is clearly an argument between two competing theories of reality. Why don't you people break? You can't even acknowledge the duality here. There's two completely different formulas defining the most important thing in the universe: motion. The power of motion. The power of motion is being completely differently defined by the two philosophies: momentum versus kinetic energy. They are not compatible theories. They are not. There's no symbiosis between them. They are completely conflicting, contrary descriptions of the reality. They give completely different answers. There's only 1 minute of every day where they have the same answer. Okay, one clock is broken, one clock works. You have to choose one of them. I'm choosing the one that really worked, or he showed that it worked. Newton's mechanics. They can't show me one error made by Newton. One thing that Newton did using momentum where he got a wrong answer. They can't show us that, yet they say there's some necessity to fix Newton's mechanics because it's broken. That's why they keep lying and trying to say this is Newton's mechanics, when clearly that's not the history. I mean, it's just, again, it's as big a lie as saying Einstein invented entanglement. Okay. That has all been done ad nauseum. So that's what Piro says, that somehow they've made all these great arguments. How can we deny it? They've shown it. They've explained it. They've done it all. Why are we having any problem understanding? Why am I having any problem believing them? So an amazing, just complete denial of the obligation here at all. All he's done is drawn a dinosaur with a crayon and say, look, isn't that proof they existed? I drew it with a crayon. Isn't that... what more do you need? I mean, it's just so silly. And the problem is the confusion in the question. There's no confusion in the question. They're competing answers to a simple question. How much energy does it have? How much capacity to move things in the universe does it have? That's all the question, and they get two different answers. That's what's at stake here. So, I mean, all this pretense that this is about some other semantics or something, you know, this is just an argument about word game. No, this is clearly an argument about two completely different universes where you navigate them completely differently. You fuels have completely different amounts of power. It's completely different universes. Kinetic energy is regular energy, so you shouldn't have said it. Momentum is not energy. So that's his statement. Again, so how... it's the most ludicrous, I think, statement you could possibly make. I mean, the momentum of a gorilla charging you, it's all about its momentum, not its kinetic energy. I mean, it's all about just its weight and velocity of its fist. You know, I mean, this is just horseshit. It's just related to energy, just like force. It's just related to energy, like force. So momentum is some kind of force thing. I don't even know, how do you even make sense out of that? How do I convert this into some kind of into some kind of ambiguous quantity? It's an explicit thing, momentum. How can it be ambiguous and explicit? And time and mass are related to it. So that's just absolute mush. Doesn't mean anything, can't mean anything to anybody. He's saying momentum is real and means something, but it's meaningless because it doesn't give you the right answer. Why don't you explain how momentum is the real energy? Well, Newton's mechanics works. That's one explanation. I've shown you experiments that prove it also. I can show you physicists saying momentum is always conserved. I mean, what else do I need to show you? Which is, at best, a word game. So again, he's pretending it's a word game. Getting very different answers is a word game. Crashing on the moon is a word game. No, it isn't. And try to explain it without words. Whatever. I hate to tell you, but math is real. So this is another argument that somehow their perversion, okay, their contrivances are real math. They're 2 + 2 reliable. So he's saying his derivation of F equals change in momentum over time, his perverse derivation of that into 1/2 mv² is somehow as good as 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, I'd say that's a big pile of hyperbole. Okay, it's not going anywhere. Well, we'll see. We'll see whether it's going somewhere. There's certainly the argument to be made that you're lost in it, and that it's all a big fake because you're religious kooks and you can't deal with reality. Okay, if you don't like it, okay, well, try to explain that without talking to me. So, yeah, Piro is just incomprehensible. If you don't like it, okay, well, try to explain that without talking to me. I don't know. I don't know what the fuck that could mean. So nothing can be explained if you don't have a mathematical formula. I mean, it's just, and when you're contrived. Let's understand that Leibniz's first shot was mv squared, not 1/2 mv squared. So it was a huge error. Way the fuck off. That's okay, though. Because it was math, and all math is correct. So even though it was completely wrong, it was 100% correct because it was math. Okay. Shit. You are saying energy isn't one thing. So this is the JPG guy. That it's not really a thing at all, but rather a label we put on a conglomeration of concepts: momentum, force, time, mass. Draft is saying the conglomeration concept needlessly complicates things. I don't know if I say that. Easier to understand if we just call it momentum or force. If we just call it energy, I'm again saying it's all the same thing. It's the capacity to move mass of velocity. And the rule is, okay, if it has more mass, you have to apply more energy. If you want more velocity, you have to apply more energy. Something that makes atoms move. There you go. Something that can give it momentum to something else. That's right. You have to be able to give it momentum. You have to have momentum to give momentum. And if you're creating heat and deformation, you have to use your momentum to do it. If I'm going to deform your stupid, ugly face, okay, I have to give away my momentum to do it. Okay, that's energy, he is saying. Yeah, that's explaining energy in a way that makes common, this isn't the point, natural sense to an observer. Regardless of what makes sense to human beings, I mean, that's the part that, absolute nonsense makes sense to human beings. So this isn't about what makes sense to human beings. It's about what's a valid argument. And if there's overt paradoxes created by your physics, you need to fix the physics. Because paradoxes are, that's basically saying your answer is wrong. Okay, so Pyrrha just ends with this tripe. Force and momentum already have different meanings. What the fuck they could possibly be besides right answer and wrong answer. One of them's right answer, one of them's wrong answer. That's all there is here. There's nothing else. And I would argue we know one of them has to be right because we know we did land on the moon. So the question is, what did they use to land on the moon? Okay. Energy already means what you said. I mean, do they believe the dime has 2,000 joules of energy? Did it take 2,000 joules of energy to shoot the dime? Or did it take the same energy as the 2-liter bottle? Okay, energy already means what you said, the ability to do work. Yes, then what is work? Work is moving other things. And how do you move them? By giving them momentum. So again, we're back to the circular reasoning. You can't have any other energy besides momentum. Momentum is what you're giving away. So it's just about whatever momentum you have. You can't give more than what you have away. Gary is objecting to the formula. I'm objecting to your formalization. Yes, I'm saying your formula is a contrivance completely made out of shit. Your work equals F times distance can't mean anything except in a circumstance where there's a constant force. So again, and none of these examples have anything to do with constant forces. They have to do with initial velocities and final velocities. If you don't care about the formula, fine, don't say it's momentum. So again, more of this nonsense about why should I care about a formula that I've already proven, the history proves, it has no credibility. It was invented for religious reasons. It was redug up for free will, magical reasons. It's never had any integrity. It took 100 years for you to put the stupid half in front of it and contrive some notion that somehow it's Newton's formula. It was Leibniz's formula for 100 years. So again, it's just more lying to say this is Newton's mechanics when it's clearly not Newton's mechanics. It's his worst enemy in life's mechanics. I mean, it really is. It's like saying Jews invented the Nazis. I mean, this is just such a lie to call this Newton's physics. It's a despicable lie. All right. So, enough. Oh, here, what's this spring paradox thing? I thought he had given up on the spring paradox, but no. Same thing again. Spring attached to wall. You compress it with different masses. Like it would make any difference how I compress the spring. I can use my finger or an elephant. I've already made this argument. That's why springs are really good at collecting energy, because they don't care how fast you compress them or how slowly you compress them. It's a really good way to store energy. And as I pointed out, springs store the energy, what makes them a good way to measure energy, because they're actually storing it. So you're more likely to get a correct answer. They're not destroying the energy. They're not converting the energy into something that's harder to see, like heat. Let's see. So, and all that makes is how much it's being compressed. So I don't even know how you possibly contrive that you're making an argument I already haven't just made. Momentum can't be stored or saved for later. Now, isn't that the stupidest thing ever stated? Oh, yes, it is. It's insane. Flywheels do it all the time, retard. I mean, I can give tons of examples of where you're mechanically storing the momentum. Okay, it's like present time in the sense that you can't catch it. Of course you can. Only think about it afterward. So again, I guess he doesn't think when you're putting energy into a battery or even into a spring that you're not storing it by changing the magnetic potential between the atoms, that you're really just generating it by changing the charge potential inside the arrangement of the atoms. And that's what's actually making the force, is that you're basically misaligning a bunch of magnets, and now the magnets want to realign. And it's the power of their will to realign their uncomfortable condition that is really the energy stored in the spring. You can't catch the momentum because it's always going somewhere. So again, it's obviously trapped in circles, or trapped going back and forth, or trapped in the sense that it's not going out of the universe. So again, he doesn't even understand the idea of trapping motion, and that's basically how you store motion, is to trap it. It's motion. The mass is the sum of the motion vectors. The mass is the sum of the motion vectors? No, the mass is the sum of the electrons and protons, retard. The weight is the sum of the motion vectors. In a calculation, the vectors are redistributed, but their total value remains the same. So who's arguing with that? But you can store energy and use it later. So he first says you can't store it because it's always moving, and then he says you can store it. So, yes, right in his own fucking comment. Complete fucking bullshit. Momentum can't be stored or saved for later. Yet it can be. But you can store energy and use it later. So he doesn't think the energy is momentum. He thinks it's some special other thing. It's something other than some sort of displacement of motion. You change the motion inside the object, and that's like the battery, like the chemical battery, that this isn't real motion inside the object, when of course it is. That's why it gets hot and different things can happen. The reason is its value, and its value isn't going anywhere more than the numbers on a bank account. So clearly this is all about the numbers on the bank account. And you're saying that these two theories are compatible. Momentum and kinetic energy are somehow compatible when they give completely different answers to the balance in your bank. I mean, it's just ludicrous. You're saying there's $10 in the bank or there's $100 in the bank. Which one is it? you have to concede one of them gives right answers, one of them gives wrong answers. And yet you still haven't provided me one example of where Newton's mechanics fails. Where we learned, wow, we sure learned how Newton was full of shit. Momentum doesn't work. So show me where if I follow the momentum, I get the wrong answer. Show me the example where if I follow the momentum, I get the wrong answer. Oh, these people are just so despicable. So anyway, that's enough of a video. Again. Yeah. So, this has been a Draft Science video presentation, and we'll endeavor to persevere. And I cannot imagine any scenario. Okay, eventually this is going to have to take place, and what's going to be the story? What's going to be the excuse when it's shown how belligerent you fought against the change that has to take place? This is a stupid totem pole in the middle of your physics. It doesn't do anything. It's of no use. It doesn't help you get right answers. It is of no value to the physics because it's a wrong answer. It was wrong 300 years ago. It was wrong 200 years ago. It was wrong 100 years ago. And it continues to be wrong. Unevidenced. Nothing, no good reason to believe it. This is all just Ken Wheeler horse shit. And here you are fighting to defend it as physics, as good science, when its history demonstrates it's the worst kind of science. It's the science nobody wants to be guilty of doing. It's Ken Wheeler science. Pathetic. All right, till the next time.